Good morning, everyone. We'll get started in just a few seconds. Good morning. We'll get started. Welcome to today's State and Federal Program Directors Meeting. We're happy you're here today. So I know some of you are on spring break. Others are looking forward to having a spring break. Today, I am joined with my colleagues, Rachel Garcia, Debbie Cano, Helen Choi, Jeannie Keith, and Anita Lomali. We have a light agenda today, so hopefully that's good news to you. It's always good to have the gift of time, and hopefully this will help you catch up either before you leave before spring break, or maybe your schools are currently on spring break and you have more time to catch up on things you're currently working on. So again, we want to thank you for being here today. The topics we'll be covering today are the federal stimulus funds and the information you need for the annual and quarterly reporting. Also, we have some reminders about the ESSER 3 plan and the Safe Return to In-Person and Continuity plan. We also will cover some additional information about CSI, ATSI, and also want to let you know about CDE's upcoming ATSI training. We'll have some updates on federal program monitoring, and we'll end the morning with the LCAP update regarding how to set up your parent meetings and the your other meetings, as well as the Green Act. As usual, please place your questions in the chat box and we will answer any questions if we can, and follow up with written responses in a Q&A that will be emailed to you. And as always, we are recording today's training and we will post this on our website as soon as possible. You can also find the Q&As to our meetings and the slides and handouts from our previous meetings at this link. And now I will turn it over to Rachel, who will share about the federal stimulus funds.
Thank you, Adrienne. Good morning, everyone. So in this section, we just have a few important reminders regarding the federal stimulus funds. So the first reminder is regarding the federal stimulus funds annual report, and the window for the year 3 annual report will close next Tuesday, March 28th at 5 p.m. So just as a reminder, the annual reporting is federally required by the U.S. Department of Education, and the data that LEAs are required to report is different and a little bit more extensive than what's required in the quarterly report. It provides public transparency and an understanding of how these funds are being spent. And this year's annual report includes additional fund sources that were not included in previous annual reports. So all LEAs that received ESSER 1, ESSER 2, ESSER 2 State Reserve, ESSER 3, ESSER 3 State Reserves, Gear 1, and/or Gear 2 funds are required to complete the annual report. And on the slide, you can see that we've included a chart that highlights the funding source, as well as the applicable resource codes and reporting periods for each of these funds. Now, the next reminder is regarding the quarterly reporting. And so the reporting window for the quarterly reporting is also now open. And so this is for the 2023 spring reporting cycle. So the spring reporting window opened this week, and it will remain open until April 14th at 5 p.m. The applicable funds for this reporting cycle are included in the chart, again, along with the resource codes and the reporting periods. And so you can see in the chart that for all of the fund sources in this reporting cycle, the reporting period is January 1st, 2023 through March 31st, 2023. And additionally, LEAs that received ESSER 3 funds must also provide the web page links to their ESSER 3 expenditure plan and/or their safe return to in-person instruction and continuity of services plan if any updates have been made to either of those plans. And then at the end of this section, we've included links to the CDE's annual reporting help webpage, as well as the quarterly reporting help webpage. And so both of these pages provide several resources to support LEAs with completing both of these reports. So this slide just provides a few reminders regarding the revisions to the Safe Return to In-Person Instruction and Continuity of Services Plan, as well as the ESSER 3 expenditure plan. And so as you may remember, both of these plans were required as a condition of receiving ESSER 3 funds. So the first plan required under ESSER 3 is the Safe Return to In-Person Instruction and Continuity of Services plan. And so remember, this plan must be reviewed and, if appropriate, revised at least every 6 months until September 30th, 2023. LEAs were required to seek public input on the development of this plan and must also seek public input and take that input into account when determining if any revisions are needed and when making those revisions. And then just one other thing to remember is that any revised plans must be publicly posted on the LEA's website. The second plan required under ESSER 3 is the ESSER 3 expenditure plan. And so remember, this plan is considered a living document and therefore should be reviewed and revised as the LEA's spending needs change. So really, the ESSER 3 plan should reflect how the LEA is actually spending its ESSER 3 funds. And like the other plan just mentioned, the ESSER 3 expenditure plan also requires public input, as well as input from specific community partners when reviewing and revising the plan. And then again, any revisions to the plan must be publicly posted on the LEA's website. And so just one other important thing to note is that these plans are being scrutinized, and the U.S. Department of Education Office of Inspector General has stressed that future federal oversight will monitor the review as well as any needed revisions of these plans. So you'll want to ensure that your LEA is reviewing and, if needed, revising these plans, as well as seeking input from the public and community partners when making those revisions. So this slide just provides a few reminders regarding the use of ESSER funds. So when determining if a purchase is allowable with ESSER funds, remember that there are 3 criteria that must always be met when using ESSER funds. So first, the purchase must be in accordance with the allowable uses. And second, it must be in alignment with the statutory purpose of the program. And remember, that's to prevent, prepare for, or respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. And then the last criteria is that the purchase must align with the relevant cost principles in the Uniform Grants Guidance. Also, when determining if something is allowable with ESSER funds, keep in mind that it really depends on the context of the purchase. So in one situation, something may be allowable, whereas in another situation, it may not be. So for example, if you're purchasing additional play equipment to allow for more distancing, that would be allowable to help prevent, prepare for, or respond to COVID. But replacing play equipment just to have the latest model, that would not be allowable. Another important example to note is that purchasing licenses, subscriptions, or contracts for services past the grant period are not allowed. So for example, licenses must conclude prior to the end of the allowable time period of funds utilized. And the licenses cannot be paid in advance for services that would continue after that allowable time period. At the bottom of the slide, we've included the link to the U.S. Department of Education's ESSER and GEAR Use of Funds FAQs, which was recently updated in December. Another important reminder is that prior approval is required for any single big ticket purchases of $5,000 or more. Additionally, LEAs must ensure that they are meeting all state and federal procurement requirements. And remember, the pandemic is not considered a justification to exempt LEAs from following state and federal procurement requirements. So to obtain approval, LEAs must complete the capital expenditures pre-approval application form and submit it to the CDE. And you can access the application form, which was recently revised, on the CDE website. But the link is also included on the slide, along with the link to the CDE's updated capital expenditures FAQs. And so here we've included the links to some federal stimulus reporting resources, including the link to the reporting portal, the annual reporting help page, and the quarterly reporting help page. For the reporting portal, the CDE has indicated that LEAs should use the same password that has been previously used. And then both the annual and quarterly reporting help pages provide several resources to assist LEAs with the reporting process, including blank reporting templates and step-by-step instructions. That concludes my section. I will now turn it over to Helen for reminders on CSI and ATSI.
So thank you, Rachel. Last Thursday, LACO held a CSI and ATSI workshop, and we will review the resources that were shared last week and also share a new resource to support your schools in developing their ATSI plans. In addition, we'll also highlight some of the questions from the chat from last week's workshop. So here are the resources and topics from the March 16th LACO CSI ATSI workshop. The topics included criteria for CSI and ATSI identification, planning requirements, and maintaining documentation for federal program monitoring. The resources and handouts from the training are found on this slide. So we have been getting some questions related to ATSI planning requirements, specifically around schools that are not required to have an SPSA. Please note that any school upon notification by the LEA of ATSI status, the school is required to collaborate with educational partners to develop and implement a school-level plan to improve student outcomes for each subgroup of the students that was subject to notification. Schools that are not required to have an SPSA have the flexibility to meet the federal ATSI planning requirements in the following two options. The first of those options is to use the CDE SPSA template, and the instructions are there to address the ATSI planning requirements within the CDE SPSA template. If a school is not required to have an SPSA, but chooses to use that template in order to address the planning requirements, the school does not have to operate it as it would with the SPSA, and there's no school site council required to approve the ATSI plan. The approval of the plan is done at the LEA level. The CDE SPSA template is available for download, and that link is on this slide. The second option is for the school to use the format that's chosen by the school or by its LEA, essentially develop its own ATSI plan as long as all ATSI school improvement planning requirements are met. In the next few slides, we will share LACO's ATSI planning support document adapted from CDE's CSI planning summary. Here is the ATSI planning support document. In our last workshop, we also received inquiries regarding how the ATSI requirements might be included in the LCAP and the SPSA. Single school districts and charter schools eligible for ATSI may use the 23-24 LCAP, including educational partner engagement requirements, to serve as the ATSI plan, provided that the LCAP meets the ATSI planning requirements consistent with the SS section 111D2. Here, The ATSI requirement is listed in the first column, followed by the LCAP requirement in the second column, and the last column is where the ATSI requirement may be addressed in the LCAP. For example, identify resource inequities and address those inequities through implementation of the plan can be addressed within the reflections on the identified needs in the plan summary section and/or explanation of why the LEA has developed a particular goal and/or within the action in the goals and action section. For schools using the SPSA to serve as the ATSI plan, per Ed Code 64001H, schools may utilize SIPSA or SPSA to serve as the ATSI plan as long as the SPSA meets the federal ESSA planning requirements. Similar to the previous slide, the ATSI and the SPSA requirements are listed in the first two columns. The third column shows where on the CDE SPSA template the ATSI requirements may be added. For example, the requirement to include evidence-based interventions can be included in the plan strategies or activities section and/or annual review and update section. The link to the complete support document is available on this slide and on the previous slide. Now I'll turn it over to Debbie.
Thank you, Helen. Good morning, everyone. So next we're going to share some questions that have been asked from several of our LEAs, and we're going to provide you with guidance on these required actions. So the first question is the ATSI notification requirement from the LEA or the district to schools. So the notification required under ESSA is from the LEA to the school. ESSA does not specify that the notification needs to be provided to parents or to the entire school community. However, upon notification by the LEA of the ATSI status, the school is required to collaborate with the site educational partners to develop and implement that school level plan to improve the outcomes for students, the student groups who were the subject of the notification. So next slide. So is there a particular or specific format for notifying schools of their ATSI status? So no, there isn't a required format for notifying a school of ATSI status. But per ESSA, upon receiving notification from the state, the LEA is required to provide notification to the schools that were identified for ATSI. And that notification must include information of which student groups in the school are consistently underperforming. And we have attached in this slide, the slides here on the link, a sample notification letter. But again, there is no required format for that. Next slide, please. So what is the difference between CSI and ATSI eligibility? For CSI, the criteria are applied at the school level for all students. For ATSI, the criteria are applied student group level for race, ethnicity, EL status, foster youth, homeless, SED, or students with disabilities. In addition to the criteria being applied at different levels. For CSI, the criteria are used only to determine eligibility of Title I schools that were not identified for a CSI low graduation rate. And for ATSI, the criteria are applied to all schools regardless of whether they receive Title I funds or not. Next slide, please. And our last question, if a school is using the SPSA to fulfill the ATSI requirement, then will we need to take the 23-24 SPSAs to the board for approval before the end of the school year? So yes, per CDE, the expectation is that ATSI plans for the 23-24 school year are fully developed and approved at the local level, so the school and LEAs are, and that they're ready to be implemented no later than the first day of the 23-24 school year. So this will ensure that the students in the school are going to receive the full year of intervention and support consistency with the ATSI plan for that school. So next slide. And finally, as Adrian mentioned when we started their presentation, the CDE is, or the Office of School Improvement and Support Office, or SISO, are going to be holding an ATSI Planning and Support webinar on Thursday, March 30th at 10 a.m. So the purpose of the webinar is to share information and resources around the eligibility and the planning requirements for ATSI. And the CDE highly encourages LEAs to invite leadership from the ATSI eligible schools to attend. Eligible LEAs should have received information on March 9th. And advanced registration is required. The link is here on the slide, as well as the contact information for the SISO office. So please contact them if you have any questions. And so now we're going to turn it over to Adrian for FPM updates. Excuse me.
Thank you, Debbie. We just have a few reminders regarding FPM today. As you know, we're wrapping up the 22-23 FPM reviews that are still taking place right now. And CDE is simultaneously getting ready for the 23-24 FPM reviews. Right now, we're coming up in April, CDE will identify the LEAs that are in cohort B, who are up for on-site reviews, and cohort D for online reviews. Once these cohort B and D LEAs are identified, CDE will then notify the superintendent and ask for the LEA to complete a web-based LEA scheduling, and will fill out other requested information about the district. Also, at this time, the district will need to inform the CDE on who the FPM review coordinator in the LEA will be, and this person will serve as the primary point of contact with CDE during the whole monitoring process. So before, during, and after, this person will be the person on record to be the contact person for the LEA. Then in May, CDE will inform the FPM review coordinator at the LEA the schedule of dates and the schools that will be reviewed. They will also let the LEA know what programs will be reviewed. And also keep in mind, because this is so much this is earlier in the year when you're finding out, they do kind of let you know that there could be some additional programs that will be reviewed. Usually it happens sometimes in the fall or before the review happens. They may adjust the programs. Sometimes I've seen them where they've removed one. And so again, it's good to know. And you want to plan for what you do know at this time when you are informed. However, you just keep in mind to not be surprised if there are some adjustments made prior to the school year beginning in August, September time. Then we have in June, typically the program monitoring instruments for next year will be posted and released, and therefore you can get a jump on looking at if there's any changes that are going to take place in regards to the FPM instruments. It's always good to do kind of a side-by-side check and see what changes have been made. Also in August, the virtual training opportunity will take place. It will be again virtually, so it was scheduled for the first week in August. So therefore, they utilize the CDE FPM box to house all the resources and materials. And then the people that, the districts that are selected will get an email inviting them to partake in this virtual training opportunity. If you want to know which cohort you are in, here are the LEAs in Los Angeles County where you can find what cohort you are in. They also have on CDE's website the list of, it's an Excel spreadsheet of all of these schools in the state of California. So all the charter schools are there as well. So you can see which cohort you're in to know if you're possibly up for review that year. So we can see here that cohort B and cohort D, these are the potential, well, these are the districts that could potentially are, in the queue right now that can be informed next month that your district's going to be reviewed next year. At our December meeting, we shared the importance of your policies, procedures, and internal controls. And there has been an increase in the number of LEAs that are having findings this year of non-compliance during the FPM review due to the LEA typically not following their own policies and procedures. So again, we want to remind you that the policies you have in place are there to provide the purpose of why you are doing what you're doing. And it also provides specific guidelines. And it also ensures that the LEA is complying with the federal requirements. So if you have these policies in place, then then everyone, once you train everyone else, then everyone else will know why things have to be done the way they are being asked to be done. Your procedures are also important because they provide the step-by-step instructions to be followed. It will state specifically who, what, when, and how the policy will be implemented. And just know that you may need to change or adjust your procedures as you are implementing them because, again, if there's staff changes, if there are organizational changes, you're going to want to ensure that your procedures take that into account. So again, constantly making sure that your procedures are updated, they're followed, and that everyone clearly knows what is required of them. And then the last component, which really is the reason why all of the policies and procedures need to be in place, is because these internal controls will ensure that the LEA is following their own policies and procedures. It's like one person can't control everything. So you really need to have these procedures in place and followed. This will also make sure that there is operational efficiency and maximize resources because everyone will be following the same procedures. And the last bullet is important because whether you are selected for an FPM review next year or not, you must always ensure that there is no fraud or misuse of funds. In the monitoring of the CARES Act, the federal stimulus monitoring, Rachel had mentioned before that now you're doing your annual reporting and your quarterly reporting. And she also went over the procurement. And so again, there is an increase in the findings in procurement of districts not kind of following this. And so in CA CARES Act 4, this particular item in the Federal Stimulus Monitoring Program instrument, CA4 states that the LEA must follow appropriate procedure processes for its contracts. The LEA must also provide evidence that it used arm's length bargaining and received a fair price for its contracts in accordance with federal and state requirements. 4.1 also says that the LEA must also document all the procurement through non-competitive proposals that they only occurred because either the aggregate amount of the purchase did not exceed the micro purchase threshold, the item was only available from a single source, or an emergency would not permit a delay, or the CDE expressly authorized non-competitive proposals in writing, or after solicitation of sources, competition was deemed inadequate. And again, if this is all foreign to you because you do more of the program side, it really is important that you as the person that implements the state and federal programs, that you really understand the program side, but also that you're familiar with the fiscal side. The procurement procedures are required to describe the LEA's written procedures for purchasing and payment process. The evidence that is requested will verify that the LEA is following its own procurement procedures. And we know right now, as deadlines are happening in March and April for purchases, in order to have them received by the June 30th end of the year date, we know sometimes there's like an over amount of requisitions coming through, and schools are like, what do we do with this money? Or your fiscal is saying, what do we do with, as the deadlines are approaching, with the CARES Act money and the expiration dates. Oftentimes, districts and schools, are looking for ways to make sure that all the money is expended. And so that's why it's critical that everyone follows the procurement process, and all your policies and procedures that you have in place, not just for procurement, but for all of your items in your federal programs. And so during an FPM review, if the LEA fails to provide the proper procurement documentation that the CDE has requested, then this will result in the LEA having a finding of non-compliance. And usually the resolution is to reimburse the federal program, which in some cases I've seen is millions of dollars. So again, we really want to put this on the forefront, because as people are trying to spend that money, please ensure that you're following all your policies and procedures. The FPM instruments are a great place to start when you're trying to know what is needed in order to meet the requirements for the federal programs. But sometimes it can be confusing, especially with procurement. The CDE website also provides more details and resources on specific programs. So again, you always want to go to the CDE website and look up all of the information regarding the federal program that you are looking at. The CDE website has provided one resource that is shared, and this is called the State and Federal Procurement Flowchart for 2023 calendar year. And so this was shared to help LEAs understand the proper procedures that must be followed in order to be compliant. And so as a person implementing the program, this is a great tool just to kind of ground yourself with not only the procedures, but also the terms of the actions, the procurement actions that have to take place, so that when you are discussing these with fiscal, you really understand, that you're on the same page. And this is a great visual. This flow chart takes you through the process of determining which procurement actions must be followed in order to complete the purchase. You can see in the first diamond on the left side that if the purchase is less than $10,000, you may follow the informal method following the procedures for micro purchases. If the purchase is over $10,000, then the flow chart can be followed to determine the other procurement actions that would need to be followed depending on the amount of the purchase. So it really is simple. Once you follow and you answer the questions and you understand the flow of this chart, it really is very informative to understand. And then again, at the bottom, there's a note about the threshold for 2023 calendar year. So again, that's something that CDE will update. And that's why this particular table and flow chart is for the 2023 calendar year, which is different than our school year. An important key point to remember in the procurement of federal programs is that the projects must follow all of the federal procurement requirements and be implemented during the allowable grant period of the funding source that is being used. And again, the example that Rachel shared about subscriptions and such, that this is why, because it must be within the grant period. And so this is critical in terms of today's FPM update, is that it's so important for the program and the fiscal departments to work together, because again, you want to make sure that you have compliant federal programs, so that when you are, and if you are selected for FPMs, it's just a matter of gathering all the evidence and not having to, start from scratch. So thank you again. And now I'm going to have Jeannie, who will give us an update on the LCAP.
Thanks so much, Adrienne. And that's a perfect segue into the LCAP update, emphasizing the connection between program and fiscal working together. So if you go on to the next slide, this slide is addressing some upcoming meetings that our unit will be providing for district teams in April. And we're looking forward to these meetings because at these meetings, we'll support your team to review the timeline for completion of this year's LCAP. And we want to ensure that the district is on track to address all legal requirements and approval criteria prior to your board approval. We have found that these meetings really are most helpful when they include district leadership, program, fiscal, and assessment personnel. So these people can work together to support this year's LCAP implementation, goal analysis, completion of the annual update tables, and the development of the 23-24 LCAP. At the meetings, we will share the LCAP pre-review tool with the team and schedule a pre-review window for your LCAP so we can support you with feedback on any areas that may need revision prior to the district taking the plan to board approval. And we have found that the pre-review has been very helpful in guiding LEAs to make revisions needed so that the plan not only can have those revisions prior to your board adoption, and then can move forward for county office approval. And so our goal is to ensure that the district LCAP meets all approval criteria upon submission. So your LCAP contact in your district will be receiving an email shortly addressing the purpose of these meetings and providing resources, and also will ask for a time to be scheduled so we can meet with each district team. All right, moving on to the next slide. And today we wanted to provide some reminders regarding the advisory committees for the LCAP. And so we remind you that there are 2 advisory committees that provide advice to the governing board of the school district and the superintendent regarding the LCAP. And Education Code was revised in January to include parents of legal guardians of currently enrolled students with disabilities, along with parents of English learners, low-income students, and foster youth to serve on the Parent Advisory Committee. This committee is often referred to as the PAC. Additionally, an English Learner Advisory Committee is required when there are at least 15% English learners and 50 pupils who are enrolled as English learners. And this committee is often referred to as the L or the EL PAC, not to be confused with the assessment LPAC, but EL and then PAC. Next slide, please. So this slide is also provided as a reminder that the PAC and the LPAC follow the Green Act meeting requirements. And so per statute addressing councils and advisory committee meetings, these meetings shall be open to the public, and notices of the meetings and the agendas should be publicly posted at least 72 hours prior to the meeting. At the bottom of the slide, you'll see a caution. And this is included because the CDE has informed that they have received and addressed uniform complaints addressing the requirements for the PAC and the LPAC. Next slide, please. So in keeping in mind these requirements for the 2 advisory committees, it's important that the district adheres to these meeting requirements as they are presenting their LCAP to their PAC and their LPAC for review and comment. Some reminders included on the slide regarding these meetings are: first, the presentations are scheduled for each of the committees prior to LCAP adoption. Additionally, the district is providing a process for review and seeking comments from each of the committees, and notices for the meetings where the LCAP is presented for review and comment are agendized and posted at least 72 hours prior to the meeting. Also, for documentation, some reminders are provided. The district needs to maintain documentation regarding the notice for the agendized meetings. Maintain documentation regarding the comments received from each of the committees, as well as the written responses provided from the superintendent. We hope these reminders today are helpful, and we really look forward to connecting with each of the district LCAP teams in April. And at this time, I thank you for joining us today. And as Adrian said during our opening, that we were going to provide a gift of time. So we hope you take some time today for yourself and take some time to enjoy the beautiful weather as we're moving on from the rainy days. We'll leave the site open for a couple more minutes in case you have additional questions to include in the chat.